So I wonder when the last time you paused to reflect on the work that you do, on the fruits that result from your labour. We all work in some way, whether it's paid or voluntary or in the home. Perhaps some of you work with teams and on projects. And there might be a moment when a job is complete and you can stand back and think, wow, didn't we do a good job and we've achieved a lot together? Others of you might work with your hands, creating or cooking or fixing things. And when you're finished, you might look down at what you've done with pride or gratitude. Actually, I'm hoping that some of our young people that are colouring those lovely leaves will look down and see what they've completed in just a little while. Others of us work with people, caring and nurturing, instructing. So perhaps in moments of parting, when you stop to consider the role that you've played in that person's life. But I suspect for many of us in our busy world, rarely do we actually stop and pause and reflect on how our work bears fruit. Harvest time has traditionally been a moment to do just that. And I just want to share with you Tom Wright's comment on Revelation 14. And he writes, people today don't have the same instinctive feel for the joy of harvest as they once did. That certainly wouldn't have been true for a first century audience reading about harvest time on the one hand and vintage time on the other. This is what you work for. This is the moment of joy when the long months of sowing and tending, watering, pruning, protecting are last complete. Now it's time for a celebration. We're going to look at two examples from the Bible, from Deuteronomy and Revelation, in ways that God uses this tradition to speak to us today. So first of all, in Deuteronomy 16, God initiates 3 harvest celebrations. It says this in the Bible. 3 times a year, all of your men must appear before the Lord your God at the place he will choose, at the festival of unleavened bread, the festival of weeks, and the festival of tabernacles. No one should appear before the Lord empty-handed. Each of you must bring a gift in proportion to the way your God has blessed you. So this passage has a fuller explanation of the second celebration, the Feast of Weeks. This is called First Fruits, or Pentecost. Practically, it involves the first fruit of whatever you have harvested and place it before the priest in Jerusalem as an offering to God. The passage ends, you shall set it down before the Lord your God and bow down before the Lord your God. Then you, together with the Levites and aliens who reside among you, shall celebrate with all the bounty that the Lord your God has given to you and your house. We can see that there is a mixture of both worship and celebration. This is a joyful celebration as well as a serious one, with celebration for all that God has done. We've experienced some of that ourselves during this service, symbolically bringing some of the fruits of our work before God and celebrating his goodness and provision. There's another aspect to the Festival of First Fruits where each worshipper recites what might first look like a rather odd prayer, where God takes his people out of Egypt. And we wonder in that Bible verse, which I'll read actually, a wandering Aramean was my ancestor. He went down into Egypt and lived there as a foreigner, few in number, and there he became a great nation, mighty and populous. When the Egyptians treated them harshly and afflicted them by imposing hard labour on them, they cried out to the Lord, our God. The Lord heard their voice and saw their affliction, their toil and their oppression, and brought them out of Egypt with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm, with a terrifying display of power and with signs and wonders, and brought them into a new place flowing with milk and honey. We looked at Psalm 100 earlier on, where there was lots of different images of the way God has provided for us. And so it's linking that really with the Old Testament. But what's going on here? The Israelites are being asked to remember their story. Their ancestor was called Jacob, also known as Israel, the wandering, homeless Aramean. God provided for Jacob and his offspring in Egypt, but then after a while they began to be persecuted. And the story tells of God's saving work in bringing them out of Egypt through the wilderness and into a land of plenty. The danger of this good and plentiful land is that the Israelites might forget their story. They might forget their reliance on God and how he had provided and guided, how he had saved them and established them as a nation. They might even begin to mistreat other nations as the Egyptians mistreated them. So this harvest is designed to remind us and them of who they were and who we are and what their story has been, and to keep them on track in following God's ways. And so I just want to link that with us today. We live in a really happy kind of society where there's no war in this country. We can come to church, we can be together without risk of being hurt or injured. And as a people, we try to be kind to other people. And we have money, and we have food, and we have heating, and we have a roof over our head. And sometimes, I don't know about you, but we're guilty of not giving thanks to God for all that we have. And so, this is true for us. And for me, I'm reminded how good my life is. For although I have troubles and struggles, I have struggles with finances like everybody else, health like everybody else, relationships go up and down, we have good ones and bad ones, and I have low mood at times, and I sometimes get overwhelmed by all of those things. I think my life's not worth very much, and my life is very small. But then I thank God that I woke up this morning, that I've got breath in my lungs, that I'm able to be here, because there are many people who can't get out of bed. The New Testament picks up Harvest Festival language and uses it about the time when God will draw his people together. You probably know the story where Jesus is moved with compassion by the crowds around him and says that God's harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few. The New Testament describes Christians as the first fruits of what God is doing to restore his creation. God describes those who are faithful to him like this: they were bought from among mankind and offered as first fruits to God. Revelation is written to discouraged, oppressed Christians. Sometimes you might feel discouraged or oppressed in your life too. But God says to the readers, including us, don't give up. You have a story, like the Israelites in Deuteronomy, a story of struggle and calling out to God and God's plan to save you. Things might be difficult now, but the harvest time is coming, and an angel says, take up your sickle and reap, because the time has come to reap, for the harvest of the earth is ripe. Harvest means the joyful celebration of God completing his work on earth, completing his work in you. One day there will be a time when God will put everything right, and ultimately will receive you with the delight of a farmer completing his harvest. Just like the Israelites and the churches in Revelation, we need to remind ourselves of that story and remember that you have a hope and a future which is secure. Thank you.